Hello there and welcome to Lesson 1 of the Mind-Body Exploration course. I am Miriam, trauma-informed life coach and mind-body practitioner specializing in helping people overcome chronic pain and symptoms. So I'll dive right into the main topic of this video, which is the mind-body connection. And what I want to emphasize in this video and what I want you to keep in mind is that contrary to what you might have been taught or to what your beliefs are at the moment, mind and body really cannot be separated. In fact, the brain, the human brain, is actually part of the body, right? It's made up of gray matter. And to give you proof that, certain physical symptoms are related to our emotional states, I'm just going to be mentioning just a few examples, a few common examples that a lot of you can relate with. So if you think about someone who is embarrassed, right? So a kid is embarrassed in class and he's blushing and his face turns all red, right? So we can all agree that that redness, that blushing is a very physical symptom, right? Something is happening to the blood flow in the body and the child's face turns red. What is actually the source? What's actually the trigger for the blushing? Well, the trigger is the fact that this child is feeling really ashamed or embarrassed, right? Maybe to be called out in class by the teacher, okay, or to be made fun of. So if that kid, for some reason, didn't feel the embarrassment, let's say he's a very confident kid, he doesn't really care what people think about him, well, in that case, he wouldn't have blushed. His face wouldn't have turned red. So in this example, we can all agree and acknowledge that the blushing is a very physical symptom, which is a result, however, of an emotional response. To give you another example, let's say you just receive some very shocking news, right, from someone. Maybe a relative of yours got injured and you're really concerned, or maybe there was a tragedy in your area. Well, very likely, if you were to measure your heart rate right then, you would notice an increase in your heart rate, right? So if you had a heart rate monitor at the time, during that half hour or hour when you have received this shocking news, you would see an increase in heart rate. So the increase in heart rate is physical, it's real. Your heart is really beating faster. Maybe you're even trembling. Maybe you even get digestive issues, of course, because of the fear and the shock. So all of these are very physical issues, right? They're physical, there's no denying that. But what's the source? The source is your response to the shocking news, okay? So you perceived this news as shocking, as scary, as unsafe, and the body acted accordingly. So the body can create various symptoms in response to our emotional state. And this is done so that we can actually cope with the dangers around us. So let's say that we are in danger and we're being chased by a predator. Well, then the body's heart rate will shoot up and we will get a rush of energy and adrenaline. Our hormones will change so that we will have the energy to escape from that predator or to fight it. So our physiological state changes immediately in response to a threatening situation. Of course, if you're being chased by a predator and you manage to get out alive as you return home and start to relax, then your body returns to its original state. So your heart rate slows down, your digestion starts working properly again, you maybe start getting tired as you get ready to relax and sleep. And this is just one example of the various physiological changes that take place when we are confronted with different situations, right? Now, what's happening in the case of chronic pain or symptoms is that originally there was something or several things that happened and that created an emotional response inside of you. So it could have been a real injury in the past, which caused you to really fear your body and to have a trauma. It could be any source of emotional distress that shocked you or made you feel uncomfortable or safe or embarrassed or worried for long periods of time. And because of those emotional states, well, your body reacted accordingly with symptoms. One of the most common mind-body symptoms, in fact, is increased muscle tension and tightness. This is very common with people who, let's say, are very stressed at their jobs, trying to meet deadlines, and they're working at their desk, and suddenly their neck tenses up or their back tenses up because they are so focused on trying to get their work done, on trying not to disappoint their boss or their colleagues. They're being very hard on themselves. But unfortunately, we so often make the mistake of blaming that pain, that neck pain or the neck tightness or the back pain, on our posture, for example. We say like, oh, okay, so I've been sitting down for 4 hours and on maybe an uncomfortable chair, and this is why I'm getting the neck pain. This is very common, and then you might get an ergonomic chair, a special chair, and maybe you might feel better in the beginning, but then again the neck pain comes back or the back pain comes back. And the reason for that a lot of people just miss out on, because we're just not trained to be aware of this, is that what's happening is that your body is getting tense because of your tense emotional state. So tense mind, tense body. If you're constantly being hard on yourself, working under pressure, and if you're not responding to that pressure with resilience in the ideal way, well, then you're going to have a tight body. Then it is also likely that if you go to work out at the gym and your body is still tight, then you might be even more prone to minor injuries like strain, because you're trying to stretch or work out a body that is already tight. But I always like to ask the question, but where is the original tightness coming from? Where is the original source of this physical change that's taking place in the body? So this is the main concept I'd like you to keep in mind. We cannot really separate mind from body. They're one unit. And although symptoms, chronic symptoms, whatever you might be experiencing, are physical, they are not in your head, and we're never saying that you are in your head. They're very physical, but although they're very physical, most symptoms have an emotional root cause. Something emotional, a response that is causing these physical changes to take place. And unfortunately, these physical changes are negative. They lead to tightness or inflammation or dizziness or whatever, right? There are so many physiological processes that can go on, that can be triggered in the body because of specific emotional states. And to give you a little bit of background, by the way, we are quite unlucky in this modern world of ours to have lost touch with this very obvious and basic information that used to be common knowledge in ancient times. So even the father of medicine, Hippocrates, used to insist that mind and body cannot be separated. He wrote that in order to treat a disease, you have to also look at the person's personality. So he had already identified the mind-body connection, and it used to be undeniable until in the early 19th century, things started to shift with certain research that was taking place, and in particular with René Descartes. So Descartes was a mathematician, a scientist, a researcher who is famous for having introduced a mind-body dualism, who insisted that the workings of the mind were totally separate from the workings of the body. So unfortunately, his theories gained a lot of ground, and from then on, people started to believe that mind and body are separate. And of course, there was other research going on into the body, and people discovered, ways to treat and to fix injuries. So surgical developments really gained ground, which is a really good thing, because people learned how to perform very good surgeries. And also with the rise of antibiotics and vaccines, people also realized that they can actually treat the body separately from the mind, so they can treat symptoms, certain symptoms, effectively with antibiotics, and they could also prevent certain illnesses with the use of vaccines. So these were all very, very good developments. The only unfortunate thing is that because of these developments, there originated a divide between body and mind. So because these developments could treat symptoms in the body so effectively, researchers and doctors started to discount the involvement of the mind and just started to focus on treating symptoms in isolation. While this worked very well for treating acute injuries like broken bones and fractures and getting a person back together after an accident, it didn't work for chronic pain conditions. And the reason for this is that the majority of chronic pain conditions and symptoms actually originate via a mind-body response. And it was only in the late 20th century that Dr. John Sarno, a doctor of rehabilitation medicine, started to insist that chronic pain had a mind-body dimension and started to lecture and teach his patients about this. Sarno is still incredibly famous today. He published several best-selling books, including Healing Back Pain and the Mind-Body Prescription, and his books are actually famous for bringing about healing in several people. So some people have listened to Sarno's lectures and have read one of his books and they became pain or symptom free, which is extraordinary. I actually also read one of his books during those 6 weeks of recovery myself, and they really helped me understand what was going on. Unfortunately, Sarno wasn't given enough credibility by his peers. They thought that he was maybe going crazy, that he was over the top about this, and they still insisted that they had to blame the symptoms on something structural. And unfortunately, there wasn't enough research to back up his claims back then. But luckily, some of his followers, including some of the best doctors in the mind-body field today, followed through with his work. They also saw how people were healing, so how his clients had healed, and they started to conduct research. One of the most recent research is the research in pain reprocessing therapy, which I'm going to link to below, that actually proved that a mind-body treatment for chronic back pain had the best outcome for people with low back pain compared to conventional treatment and to placebo. But in the meantime, there has been other body of research showing links between things like trauma, childhood trauma especially, and the development of several chronic pain conditions later in life. And there has also been research showing that hundreds and thousands and millions of people have structural abnormalities in the body, like disc herniations, structural imbalances, degeneration, and have no pain whatsoever. So nowadays, the research proves that, most of the population over 50 years old actually have some signs of degeneration or herniated discs, but only a few actually suffer from chronic pain or symptoms. So we are seeing that actually there is no correlation between the fact that you might have a structural imbalance or abnormality and your chronic pain. And you are going to start believing this more and more as you start noticing how your symptoms behave, which is the purpose behind this course actually. Because if you've been in chronic pain for a while, you might be experiencing the famous flare-ups. So you might be having flare-ups on certain days when your pain intensity just shoots up, maybe for no reason or maybe after a specific trigger. So you might have noticed that sometimes your pain changes location, sometimes it's inconsistent, sometimes it's over the top, sometimes it's more manageable. Maybe sometimes you feel also a new kind of pain or different pains in different parts of the body. And all of these things go to show that there cannot be any specific correlation to like a specific damage in your body. Because if you do have pain coming from a specific damage, let's say you just recently tore a muscle, well then you're going to feel the pain in that same area for a while until the tear heals or until it's surgically repaired. You're only going to feel it in that area. Whereas most people with chronic pain actually experience pain that kind of moves around or shoots through the whole entire limb, or they have multiple symptoms which are structurally and organically unrelated. So this is one of the most powerful clues that shows you that something else is probably going on, besides just one old injury or one structural abnormality. If you have multiple symptoms, if they are inconsistent, if you have flare-ups in particular, that is a sure sign that something else is going on and that the mind-body connection is involved in the generation of your pain or symptoms. And I'm going to help you to get clear on this through the mind-body questionnaire that I'm going to be sharing as part of this lesson. So please take your time to take this questionnaire and assessment and to consider the questions carefully. And especially, I'd like you to think back to the time when your first symptoms started. And I'd just like to ask you to be incredibly honest with yourself. What was going on during the previous months or year and before your symptoms really kicked in? So were you going through a particularly distressing time, a stressful time? Were you going through a life change? Were you going through an increase in responsibility? Maybe a breakup or a conflict with someone? Or it could also have been something positive, like having a child or getting married, but which came with increased demands, responsibility, and which made you feel that you really needed to meet certain expectations. Or maybe you were really worried about what other people were thinking, or you were worried of losing something that was dear to you. So I'd really like you to be honest when it comes to this question and to take some time before you move on to the next lesson to answer it honestly, because this can give you a powerful indication of the fact that your symptoms are not just random, they're not just due to a condition that just happened to you out of the blue, they're not just due to an injury, but that there has been something going on that led to their onset. So please take your time with the questionnaire and with answering this question before moving on to the next video.